Hey everybody, welcome back to Drug Talk. As always, I'm your host, Garrett Campbell. Today we're going to be doing things a little bit different, and instead of talking about a medication like we usually do, we're going to be talking about a disorder. And in this case, we're going to be talking about bipolar disorder. So I have a note here that says, from a pharmacist with personal experience. So as you guys know, I am a pharmacist. I graduated in 2014, and it was very soon after my graduation that I was actually diagnosed with bipolar after my first manic episode. I think it gives me good insight because I both studied it from a healthcare professional standpoint, and I have had 5 manic episodes with 4 major depressive episodes as well. So it just really gives me good insight to kind of discuss with you guys and explain my perception of the illness. So first, I'm just going to talk about what we are going to cover in this slideshow. So first, we're going to go over the classic definition versus my personal definition. That's not to say I disagree with the classic definition. It's just that I do have my own insight into the illness, and I'd like to share that with you. We're also going to talk about the progression of mania with some personal symptoms that I've experienced, the progression of depression, again with personal symptoms. We're going to talk about what I personally use to treat bipolar disorder with success. So I did say that I've had 5 manic episodes, but I'm currently in a time period where I've gone my longest distance between episodes because I think with the help of my physician and my family, we finally figured out a good regimen that works for me to keep me out of the hospital and keep me healthy. We're also going to talk about the struggle after acceptance. So oftentimes it does take a little bit of time to accept bipolar disorder. And once you do accept it, there are some struggles that you do have to deal with. So I'll just talk about, again, my insight into that. And then I'm going to give some of my tips for individuals who have bipolar disorder. I think I've learned a lot over the last 5 years, and I just want to share some of those tips with you. So first, definitions. So the classic definition of bipolar disorder is a mental condition that is marked by alternating periods of elation or extreme happiness and depression. So obviously I do agree with this definition. It is true. It's what I've experienced. But I do want to share also my definition of how I perceive the illness. So I consider it to be a mental illness that causes one to have thoughts that are not their own, but they are perceived to be their own. So as an example, if you're in a psychosis state with mania, you may have thoughts in your mind that everybody on earth is an actor. That's actually something that I've experienced. It's called the Truman Syndrome. I even thought my family and my close friends were all actors, and they were just deceiving me and watching me to kind of control my life. So obviously those thoughts are not my own thoughts, but they came into my mind, and at the time I perceived them to be my own thoughts, so I lived accordingly to those thoughts. On the other end, in depression, you may experience suicidal ideation. You may have a thought that I'm worthless, people would be better here without me, I should just end my life because it would make my family's life easier. Now, again, compared to my normal state, those are not my thoughts, but I have experienced those thoughts, and I lived my life during that time frame according to those thoughts. So again, perceiving them to be my own. So now I want to talk a bit about the progression of mania. So it does take some time to go from your normal state into a state of mania and then psychosis. It doesn't just happen overnight. And these are kind of what I've experienced, like kind of the steps that it takes to get from a normal state to mania. So first, you have a consistent feeling of happiness. You go day to day, nothing can get you down. You feel great about life and everything is going very well, even better than usual. You then have a feeling of being driven towards goals or accomplishments. So a lot of the time, this is seen as risky business endeavors, investing money in a risky way, which we'll talk about again after the list goes on here. You then, personally, I experience a feeling of superiority and a feeling of high intelligence. You really do think you're superior to other people around you when you're in this state, and you feel like the thoughts that you have are that of high intelligence. You think that you're special because you've thought of these ideas and nobody else in your surrounding area would ever be able to come up with these ideas. And you do feel even more happy because of it. You almost feel like you have new abilities that you haven't had before. You then do become very financially carefree and risky. A lot of things are, you purchase big items that you usually wouldn't. If you're usually conservative with money, you may become very, again, carefree and liberal with your spending. One experience that I had, in hindsight, it's kind of crazy thinking back on it, but I actually went into a car dealership and bought a used BMW, which is something that I wouldn't usually do. I'll admit that it is a car that I always wanted, but I did go into a dealership and bought a car while I was manic. So things like that do kind of have an effect on you after the manic episode is over, and you have to deal with kind of what you've done while you're in that state of mania. You then experience a lack of need for sleep and consistent high energy. So during especially my first episode, I went about 3 or 4 days without getting any sleep. And I did, again, kind of feel like I had this ability that nobody else had, that I didn't need sleep, that I was so driven and goal oriented that I could just keep going to push towards my accomplishments that I felt like I needed to do right off the hop. There was no time to wait, it had to happen now. And then hypersexuality, aggression, and irritability comes into play. This is definitely when your family, especially with the aggression and irritability, and your close friends would notice the difference in you. Again, if you're very close with friends and family, they may notice the increase in spending and goal orientation. But once you become aggressive and irritable with your family, especially when they try to talk to you about what you're experiencing, then it becomes very obvious to them. And then it proceeds on into psychosis. So this is when things like the Truman Syndrome, again, thinking everybody on Earth is an actor, may come into play. I've had experiences where I literally thought that I was God. I thought I was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And I'm not even a religious person, but this is just the thoughts that came into my mind. And again, at the time, I perceived them to be true. I perceived them to be my own thoughts. So obviously, different people with bipolar disorder do have different thoughts, but mine always do seem to go in a religious way, with that feeling of being God or feeling you're the creator of the universe. Obviously, this is very far along the path of mania. So now on the other side of the spectrum, the progression of depression. So typically, I would start off, if I was kind of dipping into depression, I would start off with low energy and a consistent need for sleep. This would be the opposite of mania, where in mania, you do not need sleep. In depression, you just want to sleep consistently. Then a lack of interest in usual activities. So myself, when I'm normal, I'm a very social person. I like going out with friends. I like playing sports. But when I'm starting to dip into depression, I avoid doing these things. I have no interest in them. I just want to kind of stay at home. A lot of the times be in a dark room, laying in bed, just kind of lost in my own thoughts. Then low self-confidence comes into play. Again, as my normal self, I'm a very self-confident person. I'm very goal-oriented. I had time in the military, which helped build my confidence up. But when I'm in depression, it's just such a lack of self-worth and low confidence, which then causes the next step, social anxiety. Because you have such low confidence, you don't want to go out and be around people, because the next step, you have a feeling of inferiority. So even for myself, the thought of going out with friends to a bar, or maybe to go bowling or some other activity, maybe to play basketball, which I usually love to do, I would feel anxious about the thought of doing these things because I just have such a feeling of inferiority, which causes a lot of that anxiety. You then may experience shame, guilt, or feeling of worthlessness. This is when you really get to the point where you're very bedridden. You don't want to do anything. You really do feel worthless, and you feel like you would make other people's day worse by being around them. And when you're in this state for a while, it leads to emotional distress. So you may become very emotional. You may feel like you want to cry over normal daily stresses that usually don't seem to get you down. And then after experiencing this for quite some time, it leads to suicidal ideation. So in my worst pits of depression, I have had suicidal thoughts. Luckily, I had enough insight into it to call my family and friends right away and tell them the thoughts that I was having. But as an example, I could be in my kitchen, see a knife on the counter, and just constantly think about taking the knife to my wrist to end my life. Now, again, like I talked about earlier, those are not thoughts that I would usually have in my normal state. But in the pit of depression, I perceived those thoughts to be my own, and I really did think I would be better off to end my own life. Another example is I was living on the 30th floor of an apartment building, and I was out on my balcony, and I just kept looking over the balcony and just thinking it would be better for myself and for my friends and family if I were to jump, end my life, and make everything easier on everybody that I cared about. Again, these are not my thoughts that I would ever have, but in the state of depression, I perceive them to be my own. So now, obviously, this is drug talk, so we still do have to talk about medications. So this time, I'm just going to take you through the medications that I personally use. I would argue to treat bipolar depression successfully. Now that I've been in this state of time or this time period where it's the longest time I've gone in between manic episodes. So I think we finally kind of figured everything out with my medication and my lifestyle. So first, my daily medications. I use lithium as a mood stabilizer, 1050 milligrams once daily. Then I use Zeldox or ziprasidone, which is an antipsychotic medication. So this is to kind of prevent me from having manic episodes. I use 40 milligrams twice daily of this medication. And those are two medications that, assuming I don't run into any trouble and have to change the Zeldox, I will probably be on for the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that. I then use Imivane or Zopiclone, 7.5 milligrams nightly to help sleep. So the important thing with bipolar disorder is, so a thing that I've learned in school and that my psychiatrist told me, is the first thing that goes on the path to mania is your sleep. So once you start feeling like you don't need as much sleep, or maybe you're used to getting 8 to 9 hours and you start getting 6, but you feel fine. Those are kind of signs early off that you may be slipping into mania or hypomania. So I use Imivane just to ensure that I get a good night's sleep, because I have a lot of anxiety over about having another episode. So if I can keep my sleep under wrap and keep that in check, then it makes me have less anxiety, because every night I sleep 8 hours, I wake up the next morning knowing that I'm not on the path to mania. I then use clonazepam 0.5 milligrams as needed. This is an anti-anxiety medication. So a problem with bipolar disorder is that after having so many episodes, and even though I feel like I'm on the right track right now, there is always that constant fear of having another episode. And sometimes I do have a lot of anxiety about that. Sometimes it does turn into a panic attack. Like if I don't get the right amount of sleep one night, I might wake up the next morning and be very nervous that I'm kind of on the path to mania, because it's just something that I really don't want to experience again. So the clonazepam just helps me get through those moments where I do have the anxiety. Now, a thing that we kind of discovered over the last 2 years with myself is that my cycle between mania and depression kind of seems to go along with the seasons. So during the wintertime, once the clocks get turned back and it starts getting dark earlier, that seems to be the time where my depression starts. The progression of depression, as I explained it. So during the winter months, I use Wellbutrin XL or bupropion, 300 milligrams once daily to help treat that depression. So I'll usually probably start this in October as we're going into the winter months to prevent myself from kind of starting that progression. So now on the other side of things, during the spring, I use an antipsychotic, I would call a heavy antipsychotic from personal experience, called loxapine, 20 milligrams nightly to prevent myself from having a manic episode. Because it does seem like for myself, March, April, and May is kind of the red zone for me, kind of the danger zone, where if I'm going to start the progression into mania, it will typically be in those months. So this is a medication that I've used in hospital while I was fully manic, using 30 milligrams once daily, and that kind of crushed the mania. So I asked my psychiatrist if I could have 20 milligrams kind of on an as-needed basis to use throughout the spring, because if it can work when I'm fully manic, it should prevent me from becoming manic. Now I just want to talk about something, the struggle after acceptance. If you're watching this video and you have bipolar disorder, these points probably resonate with you very strongly. I know with myself, it took me about after two manic episodes to really accept the diagnosis. Early on, I just wanted to blame it on a mental breakdown or something else, or life experiences that were causing me to act differently. It's just really hard after you experience a manic episode to really nail it down and kind of believe that that is truly something that you have to carry with you for the rest of your life. You just want to deny that. You don't want to accept it. So I just kind of mentioned there, it does typically take a few episodes to accept your diagnosis. For me, it took about 2 to 3 episodes. I was kind of in the fence in between those. But it is noted that it does take about 3 to 4 episodes on average, it seems. Now, because it takes you so long to accept the diagnosis, you typically have a feeling of guilt for not taking it seriously early on. I know with myself, I feel like maybe if I took it more seriously after the first episode, I could have done things to prevent future episodes, like getting on the regimen that I'm on now in a quicker fashion. After you accept it and you realize that you do, in fact, have bipolar disorder, you do have a constant fear of becoming manic. The one thing that I have a bad habit of doing, it's probably helpful, but it's not really healthy, is every morning when I wake up, I start analyzing my thoughts that come to my mind. I just want to kind of just make sure that my thoughts are normal, consistent day to day, nothing too grandiose, nothing too goal-oriented. Just make sure that they're consistent mainly. You have anxiety over trusting your own thoughts. So I'll go through times where I am typically a goal-oriented, driven person anyway. So I have trouble when I have these ideas, even for example, shooting this video, just little things day to day. If you get a goal in your mind, you really have to analyze it, and you have anxiety over thinking to yourself, is this really a thought that I would normally have, or am I slowly slipping into mania right now? You just really have a lot of anxiety over trusting your own thoughts. And then more anxiety about your future outlook. I mean, with me personally, I've had 5 episodes in 5 years. And it is a fact that if you have more episodes early on, then you're more likely to have more episodes leading into the future. So there is a lot of stress when you think about your future. Like, you obviously don't want to keep going through the cycle, but you do kind of have to deal with that and accept it. So it just really does cause a lot of anxiety because you don't truly know what the future holds. Now, lastly, I just want to talk about some tips that I have for people who are watching this video who have bipolar disorder, whether you've had it for years or you're a newly diagnosed patient. These are kind of some things that I've learned over the years with my illness. So the first thing is to trust your healthcare professional upon initial diagnosis. The earlier you, even if you don't accept it, but the earlier you take your advice from the healthcare team, the better off you will be. And the next point, one really important thing along with this, is to take your medication indefinitely. The struggle that I had early on was I didn't truly accept the diagnosis, but I accepted the fact, yeah, I'll take medication, I'll use it consistently. But then once I started to feel back to myself, I would think, well, I don't need this medication anymore. And that's me. I'm a pharmacist. I've studied this. I know what you're supposed to do. But when you actually have the diagnosis yourself, it's hard to take that medication daily and think to yourself, I need this to act normal. It's something that you have to work towards accepting. Definitely have to recommend to stay away from cannabis or other recreational drugs. During my first 2 episodes, I've had a really weird sensation that while I was hypomanic, had a craving for cannabis, and that cannabis use seemed to push me into mania in a very rapid way. So I would have to say stay away from cannabis and other recreational drugs. They're just not good, and they will most likely push you into mania. Be open with your friends and family. This is something that has been a saving grace for me. I'm at the point now where if I feel off in any way, whether that be progression towards mania or progression towards depression, I instantly call my family. I tell them the thoughts that I'm having, and we make a plan if I should increase my medication, if I should go see my doctor. Just good to have open discussion about what the next move should be. And last is trust your gut if you feel off, and report to your doctor. Some days I might take myself a little bit too seriously when I have thoughts that might be a little bit out there. Maybe it's normal, maybe it's not. It's hard to tell sometimes. I mean, you just have to, if you feel like you're having a thought and it concerns you, maybe it could be a goal that you're thinking you want to start to work towards, or a feeling of lack of self-worth. Take those thoughts seriously, trust your gut if it's not your normal day-to-day thoughts that you have, and go see your doctor, because it may be early signs that you are pushing towards mania or depression. And the earlier you adjust your medication, the better, and the less far down that track you'll go. Well, that's all we're going to talk about in this video. As always, I'm very thankful you took the time to come by and watch one of my videos. If you found the information valuable and you'd like to help grow this channel, you can like the videos, share the videos, or most importantly, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And leave some comments down in the description below if you'd like to see more videos like this, or if you'd like me to just go back to simply taking a medication and talking about it. So again, that's it for today. Take care.